All right, the president echoing a theme that he is no doubt going to raise in Atlanta today, even though the substance of his remarks today will be focusing on opioid and drug-related abuses, a signature issue for the First Lady Melania Trump, but saying all this talk about subpoenas and getting former and present White House officials to speak up on Capitol Hill, he might ignore those subpoenas, and he might be urging a lot of those folks, former and otherwise, to think twice about appearing on Capitol Hill in what would be a political cabal, he has argued, amidst a backdrop of very good economic news, very good market news. And why, as he has said in the past, would you want to disrupt that by going after all of this and trying to impeach the President of the United States, i.e. Donald Trump? The National Taxpayers Union Senior Fellow, Mattie Duppler, Market Watch Tech Editor Jeremy Owens, on whether he has a point. Mattie, that's what he's been saying. Why would you interrupt a good thing? I can remember, I'm old enough to remember, that was kind of the argument of the Clinton White House when Republicans were going after him, saying, look at this backdrop, look at the economic boom, look at the internet boom, look what's going on with NASDAQ and all. Yep. Would you want to disrupt that? This is that in reverse, right?
I think that's true. And if you look at polling, you know, Mueller still kind of has some interest from the general public because it's dominated the news cycle. But other kind of fantastical stories coming out of Washington, D.C., like the Trump tax returns and other ways that Democrats are trying to get away from the business of focusing on economics, polls pretty poorly with the American public. The American public is beginning to feel that itch, too, that they'd like Congress to get back to work on the issues that matter to them. And the president is speaking directly to that question. Certainly headed into an election year, it makes sense to talk about the things that directly affect Americans, in particular coming out of tax season, right? I mean, you had the media reporting at the beginning of the year that tax refunds would be down because people's tax liabilities had gone up. And we know that wasn't true, but it took the entirety of the tax filing season to flush that out for the media to finally report that 80% of Americans got a tax cut under the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. So the president should continue to repeat that message, and I think that it makes sense that he would do so now.
You know, Jeremy, when you look at the underpinnings of this market, they still look good. Even first quarter earnings early, though we are in the process, I think about a quarter of the way through, the numbers are coming in much better than expected. Now, a lot of that could be the fact that a lot of these guys ratcheted down expectations. I've said many times on the show what I used to do with my parents when I would tell them I would fail every subject on a report card. If I got a couple of C's and D's, they thought I was a genius, but I'd lowered the expectations. Say what you will, companies have done that. So if we avoid a contracting quarter, that's further evidence, the president will no doubt say, that things are fine. What do you want to change horses for in the middle of this?
Yeah, sure. At this point, if it's a flat quarter, great. Right, because the first quarter last year was so good. With those tax cuts coming in, there was so much profits just flooding into these companies' coffers, and now they get to try and lap that. They were expected to fall about 3%. They're certainly tracking ahead of that right now. So if the S&P especially is able to maintain earnings from first quarter of last year to first quarter of this year, it will be a big win for Wall Street. And since they're tracking that way, we're already seeing the results.
You know, I'm also wondering, Mattie, whether the president is seizing on that, and the fact that more Americans are feeling better about their own financial well-being. Not across the board, but the numbers are higher year over year. And that is something that presumably would be the wind at his back in a re-election run. That could change. You've reminded me of that, and certainly many have, Jeremy included, when it comes to technology. But that, for the moment, is going the president's way, right?
Yeah, I mean, look at the macro picture. The two downside risks last year were U.S.-China trade relations and the Fed acting. We know the Fed has pretty much removed itself from that equation, and it looks right now like we're full steam ahead on a U.S.-China deal. So that pressure when it comes to business expectation has certainly been relieved. And to the point, from the consumer standpoint, that has definitely improved. Once again, that expectation game, I think, was crucial coming into tax season. When you had media telling Americans they would be worse off during this tax season, and that ended up not being the case, the consumer will be bolstered by that. And we've seen that, too, show up in the data. Retail numbers have recovered. Housing starts are recovering. We're seeing some pretty strong data moving out of this first quarter that I think will be sustained. Now, of course, the question is it sustained until 2020 and in a way that the president can continue to connect his policies here to what Americans are feeling back home?
That's what it comes down to, right? Maintaining all of this, and then you'd have to maintain it for another year and a half, essentially. Do you, Jeremy, see that happening?
there's no way to look that far into the future right now. I mean, even in this quarter, we're about to get all the big chip makers, which are supposed to be the huge anchor on the S&P and on tech this quarter, because they're supposed to have huge year-over-year declines, right? But a year and a half, can we maintain this? I would say we would see a big decline sometime this year. A lot of experts expected it early in the year. It didn't happen. So now you get some FOMO and some people moving back in. But I think we're going to see declines. Does it bounce back up is really the question. Yes, in the next year and a half, we're going to see a big decline at some point. What happens after that is really the question.
Yeah, and whether people are feeling it, right? Individual participation is still remarkably small in this market in the scheme of things historically, Mattie. So when the president likes to talk about what's going on in the markets, and he's right to crow about it, God knows we'd blame the president no matter what party he's from if the opposite were going on. But if a lot of Americans don't feel they're part of that, does it carry much bang for the buck? What do you think?
Right. Well, more Americans are attached to the stock market than have an income tax liability through their pension, retirement plan. So I think that talking about the stock market makes sense because it's where Americans feel a lot of their financial system. I do think the story about what's happening globally will also play into this. The rest of the globe does not look as good as the United States for the next year. Now, whether or not that creates drag where the United States position weakens, or it allows the president to tell a kind of a tale of two countries where he gets to talk about the American success story while the rest of the globe lags. I think that will be in part up to this administration and how they continue to message headed into the next year, and certainly how they handle trade relations coming up, not just with China, but with the EU and the rest of the world.
Yeah, that's the wild card. Guys, I want to thank you both very, very much. Then there's the issue of the Democrats and whether they seize on this, of course, to a man or woman, and there are about, as you know, 7,000 candidates running for president of the United States. That's the latest count.